Hello everyone and welcome back to Closets Gaming. Today we are going to take a look at rooMaze. This first-person roguelike hardcore role-playing game with its procedurally generated levels gives you the chance to explore dungeons, kill monsters, and gather loot. It is available on Steam for €1.99 or your regional equivalent. So when I first saw this game on the Steam store, I was really fascinated by the price tag. I mean, $2 for a game that actually looks decent? That's just not often the case. But I was still intrigued, so I picked it up. And I'm more than happy to report, this decision was a good one. But let's start by talking about the game itself. First of all, this isn't an innovative game, but it takes a lot of principle of games that came before it and tries to use them in one single package. So when you first start the game, you have a choice to make right at the beginning. More specifically, what class do you want to play as? And you have three options to pick from. Either you want to play as the warrior, using blunt force to kill your enemies, rangers that uses bows and guns to achieve the same thing, and mages that use magic to blow their enemies into smoldering pieces. But the basic combat is pretty similar for all three classes. Use your weapon to bash your enemies' heads in, collect every little piece of stuff that is laying around that could potentially help you, and try to avoid taking damage as much as you can. But I gotta say, I feel like the combat is a bit too slow, because to strike an enemy, you have to charge your attacks. It would even be fine if the attacks themselves would be just really slow with certain weapons, but you literally have to hold your right click until it fully charges, and only then you can release the strike, otherwise the attack just decharges. On top of these very basic mechanics, you have your abilities. To be more precise, you gain abilities as you level. Each class has an ability available once you level up at least once, and thank God for that. For instance, the mage gets a fireball, and the warrior gets sweeping strikes. These abilities obviously do more damage than your regular attacks, but they also usually have a cooldown and always a cost to mana. When talking about the game's combat, I also have to mention the game's enemies. These can be divided into two basic categories, melee and ranged enemies. The melee enemies include things like your basic rats, skeletons, goblins, and there really isn't that much to say about them, other than being good at kiting is the way to defeat them. Secondly, there are the ranged enemies, and as far as I know, there are only two of them in the whole game. The floating eyes that shoot magical beams at you, and mechanical tanks that shoot arrows at you. The eyes are actually much easier to defeat, as they have this weird mechanic that whenever you hit them, they reset their cast. Last of the mechanics that is connected to combat are injuries you can suffer, and there really is quite a high number of them in game, starting with your basic cut, going through broken bones up to first degree burns, and each of these has a different effect based on what part of the body has been affected by it, so if you can, avoid them. So that's it for the combat mechanics. Then we have the RPG mechanics, and yet again, these are really simplified. You get a talent tree for each of the classes, and they offer you choices of getting abilities straight away or picking up passive bonuses. What was nice though, is that even when you pick abilities themselves, you do still get at least a small passive bonus anyways. But before you get to much desired abilities, you first need to level up, and that is done in the most obvious way ever. By killing enemies. Other than gaining new abilities as you level, you will also gain access to better gear, because a lot of the gear in this game is locked behind a level wall. Well, locked. You will be able to find the gear really easily, but you won't be able to equip it unless you are at the appropriate level. Since the game only uses a very basic stat system, health, armor, and mana, you won't really need to pay that much attention to the stats on the gear, trying to min-max everything, because it will be really obvious when a piece of gear is better than the one you're using currently. The next bit of the game are its procedurally generated levels, and everything apart from the starting room is generated randomly for you. I was pretty impressed by the variance in the room, but over a few playthroughs I started to see patterns, and after I played through the game a few dozen times, I could see that while the rooms are still in random order and have enemies and loot placed in them randomly, the actual rooms themselves are just pre-made. Though this also has its benefits, as it guarantees that the rooms themselves are always somewhat balanced. They just don't have like a bazillion traps in them and such stuff. Speaking of traps, there sure are a lot of them laced around each level in this game. There is one good and one bad thing to say about the traps. The good thing is that all the traps in game can be avoided, either by disarming them or by just avoiding coming near them. The bad thing is that there are only two types of traps in game. First, there are the dart traps that can be deactivated by finding their trigger, and there are these mechanisms that shoot out the ground, and man, before I figure out a way to deal with these, I freaking hate these because they break your bones. And last, but certainly not least, I should talk about how difficult the game is, since it calls itself a hardcore game. And to a degree, it does live up to that. The game offers you 3 difficulty levels: casual, on which I mostly played, normal, in which I did a few playthroughs, and leper, that I just checked out and quit after 2 rooms, since the game was incredibly slow for me then. The main differences between these difficulties come in how hard you and your enemies hit. So you need to hit enemies much more many times, subsequently making kiting that much more important, and making you take a lot more damage from the hits, again making kiting that much more important. If you're at least decent at kiting and not a total dumbass when it comes to avoiding traps, the game becomes quite easy pretty fast. But if you're bad in either of these 2 skills, the game will quickly punish you with severe injuries that will only gimp your characters even further, most likely slowly dragging you towards death, unless you get lucky and find the right kind of medicine for a particular health issue. As you probably guessed from the description of the mechanics, I was really surprised in how much value the game actually offers for its price. I mean, seriously, it's a $2 game, but it does certainly have its flaws. For a procedurally generated game, it has very little content to actually generate from, but it does provide a large degree of replayability if you don't mind the repetitiveness of the environment. The combat feels somewhat slow, at least at first, but I got used to the pace of the game after a few playthroughs. While I certainly was often fizzed by the injury mechanics, those are done in quite a unique way and provide a bit of originality to this otherwise pretty cookie cutter game. When you put all of this into a single bag, take the price tag into consideration, you get a pretty amazing game, to be honest. I doubt that outside of free-to-play games, you can get that much of a better value deal. So now I'm done talking about the game's mechanics. Let's instead take a look at how the game looks. As you see from the footage running in the background, the game takes on a very Minecrafty look, using blocks for everything. And while I will gladly admit that this style isn't really my thing, it isn't a bad choice, as it allows the game to look pretty incredible for its low price tag. The game is using the Unreal 4 engine, and it uses its probably best feature, light effects, to its advantage. As it is often the case in old school inspired RPGs, a lot of the rooms in game are really dark, and you need a light source to see anything in them. And the contrast of light and dark is one of the strong points in the 4th generation Unreal Engine. So kudos for using the strengths of your engine. But because of the visual style the game takes on, there really isn't that much else to talk about. For a developer skilled in making the models for this game probably wasn't that much of a chore, and while they do look good, they aren't really breathtaking in any way. Some of the particle effects are nice, and some are really crappy. Here, I can definitely see room for improvement if the developer ever decides to make a sequel. Music and sounds wise, there really isn't anything to talk about. The game uses decent enough music not to insult you, but it doesn't really provide anything to the atmosphere of the game. The sound effects are pretty lackluster in my opinion, most probably just bought of some sort of sound store on cheap, but they do serve their purpose, but again, don't provide anything extra. Performance-wise, I had one single issue with the game, but it wasn't the game's frame rate, nor it was stuttering, and nor where it crashes. In these classical terms of performance issues, the game actually worked flawlessly for me. The issue I had came in the fact that occasionally when I entered the skill menu, the game would stop responding to the mouse. Eventually I figured out that you just need to push the skill menu key again and it would fix itself, but before I figured it out, man was it irritating, and I even restarted a few runs because of it. So, in conclusion, a pretty damn good game. For its price, even an amazing game. Seriously, if you like either hard RPGs or dungeon crawlers, and you have $2 to spend, I will happily recommend this game to you. While it certainly is an amazing gem for your collection, it will provide you with potentially hours of fun. Though if you're really just looking for the best in the genre and you don't care how much money you spend, there are probably better games to pick up. But still, $2 is really no money these days, so at least consider checking this game out. Well, that's it for today, guys. Hope you liked the review, and if you did, please consider liking it, subscribing to my channel for more gaming reviews, or comment if you have something you would like to add. And if you didn't like the video, well, dislike it. See you all next time with more gaming content.